Good evening and welcome to the COVID-19 update on Channels Television. I'm Millicent Nwaka. Here are some of the highlights this hour. Teachers leading in crisis, reimagining the future. As the world celebrates Teachers' Day, President Muhammadu Buhari uses occasion to approve special salary scale for Nigerian teachers. National Human Rights Commission speaks on the Commission's new approach in handling gender-based violence post-COVID-19. And U.S. President Donald Trump expected back at the White House as health reportedly improves. It is our collective responsibility to stay safe and protect each other from COVID-19 as schools gradually reopen. Parents, students and school management have all a role to play in reducing the risk of COVID-19 spread as we all continue to follow the NCDC guidelines to keep safe. The country recorded 58 new confirmed cases from 8 states and the FCT, with Plateau State leading with 18 cases, followed by Lagos and several other states. The figure, the country's lowest in more than 5 months, was confirmed by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control figures of yesterday. The last time the daily count dropped lower than 60 cases was in April. At that time, Nigeria had confirmed less than 2,000 infections in total. And you find that April 14th, we had 30 cases. The 15th, we recorded 34. April the 16th, we recorded 35 cases, and pretty much that time we had 51 cases on April the 17th. Between September and 30th, of course, the last days in September and the few days into the month of October, we've confirmed over 2,000 cases of COVID-19. But let's take a look at the coronavirus curve in Nigeria. You find the last 30 days, you see that last night's numbers were the lowest in 30 days, while the highest we recorded, the jump you can see there, was on September the 8th, when the country recorded 296 cases. Till date, 59,345 cases have been confirmed, 50,768 cases have been discharged, and our death toll remains at 1,113. The World Teachers' Day is held annually every October 5 since 1994 to commemorate the anniversary of the adoption of the 1966 ILO UNESCO recommendation concerning the status of teachers. According to UNESCO, this recommendation sets benchmarks regarding the rights and responsibilities of teachers and standards for their initial preparation and further education, employment and learning conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly added to the challenges faced by already overextended education systems throughout the world. It's no exaggeration to say that the world is at crossroads, and now more than ever, we must work with teachers to protect the right to education and guide it into the unfolding landscape brought about by the pandemic. In commemoration of the World Teachers' Day today, President Muhammadu Buhari approved a special salary scale for teachers in the country. He also increased the number of years of service from 35 to 40. The announcement was made in Abuja by the Education Minister, Mr. Adamu, who represented the President at this year's celebration. The federal government has announced plans to deploy 60,000 environmental health emergency volunteers to 774 local government areas of the country to ensure that the guidelines of the COVID-19 protocols is strictly adhered to as schools reopen on October 12th. The Minister of Environment, Dr. Mohammed Abubakar, told journalists in Abuja that the health officers will be assisting schools adopt the basic safety measures, assuring that there will be monitoring and evaluation by the federal government to ensure strict compliance.
60,000 environmental health volunteers will be working with other stakeholders at the subnational level in accordance with the guidelines for the safe reopening of schools. The roles of the environment sector generally and specifically that of the environmental health practitioners includes participating in developing detailed protocols, established and maintaining prescribed hygiene standards and practices, including water, sanitation and hygiene, that is wash provisions, additional measures of temperature checks and screening, hand hygiene, access to adequate gender segregated toilet facilities, adequately ventilated classrooms and hostels accommodation.
Edo State is adopting a 3-year program that will train persons interested and passionate about teaching to ensure that only trained teachers teach its pupils and students. The Governor, Mr. Godwin Obaseki, was speaking at an event to celebrate the World Teachers' Day and honor public school teachers in the state for ensuring that learning continued at home, online and offline while schools were shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Because a lot of you
Now, schools have resumed academic activities for 2020-2021 academic year in full compliance with the COVID-19 protocols, and this is in Ebonyi State. The State Commissioner for Education, who monitored the resumption of schools across the state, expressed satisfaction with the teachers and students complying with the NCDC directives. He also used the opportunity to extol the teachers as the world celebrates Teachers' Day today.
First of all, let me express my happiness today that at last the Executive Council of Ebonyi State, through our leader, Engineer Dr. David Nwezomai, approved that schools should resume today. And what I'm seeing, having visited some schools, is that the parents, the teachers complied. They are very excited to come back to school after so many months of closure. So I cannot express how happy I am, even though it is challenging in this period of COVID-19. The Ministry of Education, the state government, Ebonyi State government, and the parents, the teachers, and the students have shown their desire that no matter what the COVID-19 challenges might be, they are ready to go back to school. As World Teachers' Day, there is no other better day we could have resumed school in Ebonyi State other than today. It is a reminder of the fact that education stands at the bedrock of development of our state and Nigeria in general and the world at large.
And a visit to some schools in the Imo State capital reveals reasonable compliance to the COVID-19 safety protocols, while in some primary schools, the management says the first few days will be used for cleaning of the environment. Here's more. Our correspondent, Ito Kwekute, brings us this update.
After 8 months of closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic, schools in Imo State have now reopened following state government's announcement of the resumption date. The state government, through the Ministry of Health and COVID-19 Task Force, rolled out some guidelines and protocols for schools to observe as they resume. Earlier today, we went round Owerri, the Imo State capital, to monitor the level of compliance of schools to the COVID-19 pandemic, both primary and secondary schools. While some schools are taking this protocol seriously, some are still finding it hard to grapple with this new normal.
We make provision for things that the sanitizers and buckets for the children to be able to cope so that they will not get this COVID. We are on it. We're preparing very seriously. We're washing the glasses now.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the COVID-19 task force in Imo State, Professor Morisiwu, said the government has put all modalities in place in case of any eventuality, and the state government is adhering strictly to the NCDC and UNESCO guidelines on school resumption.
We are actually following the UNESCO guideline. UNESCO has a very clear plan, which actually consists of 3 main components. One is the planning itself. The planning has to take care of finances, take care of human resources, has to take care of the logistics. So we did have an elaborate plan, but we are dealing with children, and that particular age, the secondary school, is actually the age of people who are by nature not supposed to, they don't normally obey laws. So we have to really have very careful guidelines how they should follow.
Ito Kwekute for COVID-19 update.
And the COVID-19 pandemic poses an enormous risk to the health and safety of learners, teachers, parents, school administrators, education practitioners and the wider community to take a further look as, of course, schools reopen across the country. We have joining us from Abuja studio, Professor Titi Lola Obilade. She's an epidemiologist. We'd like to thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Now, the Minister of Education, while asking unity schools to resume, attributed the decision to the flattening of the coronavirus curve in Nigeria. What do you think? Are we making progress at flattening the curve? Isn't it important for us to perhaps experience a sustained reduction in coronavirus cases over a certain period of time? Have you noticed anything?
I will actually say that we should be cautious in the interpretation of our numbers because, like you said, it has to be sustainable. And if we're talking about flattening the curve, we need to look at the numbers, the number of tests that we're doing. If we do a large number of tests and that 5% or less of those tests come out positive, then we can begin to say that we have this disease under control and perhaps we're flattening the curve. But what we are having is we can have a certain number of new cases today, maybe 58, and then previously, maybe a day or 2 days before, we have it in the hundreds. Now, we have to look at it in tandem. How many tests were performed? So we need to look at the number of tests, because if we perform a small number of tests, then look at, obviously, from the small number of tests, then we'll have a small number of new cases. So if we increase our dragnet, we spread the net, we grab a whole larger number, thousands, hundreds of thousands, adequately tested, and then we can now begin to say that, okay, if it's now like 5% of that is positive and is consistent, say 14 days or 21 days is consistently dropping, as in consistently, then we can say that, okay, we're beginning to flatten the curve. But what we're seeing is just like a sample of the tests that we're doing, because really, you know, we're doing diagnostic tests, but we're not testing enough. But from the diagnostic tests that we're doing, it appears from that small number that is actually decreasing. So we will not be fair on the rest of us Nigerians to actually say we're flattening the curve.
Professor Obilade,
the numbers can decrease today depending on the actual number of tests that we're doing.
Essentially,
again,
if you were to,
go ahead,
just quickly, if you were to advise the government now as to reopening, based on some of the things you've mentioned, would you say that, you know, states should go ahead, or perhaps we shouldn't until we can have perhaps a larger number of tests carried out?
Well, we have to look at the peculiar situation we have in Nigeria. Now, this virus is a very ambitious virus. What I'm saying is it's gotten a permanent residency visa all over the world. It's on a global stage. So it's not going anytime soon. So we've got to learn to live with it. And we can't simply say, let's wait for the vaccine to come up. No, there's some things that we have to be personally responsible for. And we have to be able to motivate ourselves, sustain those habits, which is mask wearing. Okay? Effective mask wearing, not wearing it under your chin, not wearing over one ear, but wearing it and changing it daily. And then the social distancing must be there. Washing of hands, the provision of water for washing of hands. And then continuous sustainable health education. These things must be there because we cannot put the education of the children on hold. Because already, like 1 in 5 children that are out of school come from Nigeria. So we're already behind. So to now play catch up again will put us further behind. So we've got to get on board and learn to live with it. But like I said earlier on, it's not the flattening of the curve that we're having. We've just got to intrinsically motivate ourselves and not say that, okay, the government is doing this on our own. These are personal responsibilities, intrinsic motivation. We need to motivate ourselves. I've got to wear my mask. I've got to wash my hands. Because what we're having is this. It's possible, without actually doing an antibody testing, that a lot of people have actually caught the virus and recovered without knowing. So the severity of it is not as it was in the beginning. So our immune system perhaps is beginning to learn to adapt to it. But like I said, without actually testing, going for antibody testing, we cannot know. What we are doing with the NCDC is a diagnostic test, okay, to know those who have it. But the antibody test will know those who have had it. You and I might have actually had it without knowing, because it's been out there and not everybody has been wearing their mask. And it's been on the global stage for so long. So what the government is doing is opening up gradually, which is a good thing, but sustaining all those protocols. And it's not enough for the government to say it. Yes, we have to do the personal responsible thing, which is intrinsically motivate ourselves. The government does its own by extrinsic motivation, but that is not enough too, because if you enforce, after a while you say, okay, let's relax. People like we have in the European countries now, it jumps up, they have a second wave. But if it is internally motivated, it's easier to maintain, it's easier to sustain. So the health education was there to actually help us to sustain it.
All right, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. We've been talking to Professor Titi Lola-Obilade, an epidemiologist. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We have more on the global response to the pandemic when we return. Please stay with us. And still on the occasion of the World Teachers' Day, the Kaduna State chapter of the Nigeria Union of Teachers is calling on the government and other stakeholders in the education sector to work with teachers to protect their rights in education and guide it into an unfolding landscape brought about by the coronavirus pandemic. Speaking at an event to mark the day, the Kaduna State NUT chairman, Mr. Ibrahim Sarajo, notes that COVID-19 has significantly added to the challenges faced by the already overextended education system globally. He also commended the state government's efforts in combating the pandemic in schools.
The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly added to the challenges faced by already overextended education system throughout the world. It is no exaggeration to say that the world is at a crossroad, and now more than ever before. We must work with teachers to protect the right to education and guide it into the unfolding landscape brought about by the pandemic. While we commend the state government for the concerted effort made towards combating COVID-19 pandemic in our schools, that made the senior secondary school and junior secondary school students to conveniently write their examination. We must commend the government at both the state and local government levels for the regular payment of salaries in the state. However, we suggest that another strategy be adopted to fast-track the prompt payment of primary school teachers' salary.
And now to another issue brought about by the coronavirus pandemic, and this is increases in gender-based violence during the lockdowns, labeled the shadow pandemic by the United Nations. It threatened the lives and livelihoods of women and girls, and in some cases boys, in Africa's largest economy. A lack of coordination amongst key stakeholders, poor implementation of legal frameworks and other norms were pointers hampering government, also civil society efforts to address gender-based violence. Joining us for more on this from our Abuja studios is Mr. Harry Obey. He's the Director of Women, Children and Vulnerable Groups, Department of the National Human Rights Commission. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much, Millicent. Happy to be here.
All right, we've come a long way from the complete lockdown due to the pandemic at the beginning to the easing of the different sectors of the economy. Today, what would you say with regards to the gender-based violence, the numbers across the country? Are we seeing more cases before the lockdowns?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of restriction-induced violation, I think there's a bit of ease or a reduction in restriction-induced violation. You recall when the discussion started, we always said that because people were locked down in the same place, the numbers went up. But there is also this belief or school of thought that it has always been there in the society. The lockdown only helped to exacerbate it. So we can say, yeah, there's a bit of flattening of curve with regard to restriction-induced SGBV cases. However, the cases are still there in the society, and we need to step up our efforts in dealing with them.
The lockdown also compromised access to life-saving services and justice. We heard this from a lot of people because they needed it most at the time. As a commission, what have you learned, and what do you think Nigeria has learned that we can use to provide safer support? And this is, should another lockdown stare us in the face?
Yeah, thank you. What we have learned from the unfortunate development with regard to COVID-19 lockdown is the fact that we cannot continue to rely on physical intervention to cases or report of SGBV or any other violation whatsoever. Just because we were locked down, a lot of service providers could not provide the services that they needed to provide at the optimal level. So the need to actually leverage on technology actually came to fore. And so what the Commission is doing, and I think it's a lesson for every other responder with regard to issues of emergency, that we need to leverage on technology, develop our ability to use technology to the point that if wherever we are, irrespective of whether we're in our offices or in our homes, we should be able to provide services that will address the needs of the time. So the lesson learned is for the country, Nigeria as a country, to continue to improve in our technology infrastructure, and also service providers to actually develop applications and other ways of providing services using technology. So the Commission has actually tried to coordinate all service providers through the use of technology. Recently, we worked with other stakeholders to develop an application, a technology that harnesses complaints and also harnesses the services of responders to SGBV cases. It is called the ONSOB. It was launched on the 24th of September 2020. And what ONSOB does is to actually have all responders on board, and whenever any case is reported across the country, the nearest responder is activated to actually respond to such cases. And then the application also collates the number of cases that are actually reported and responded to. So we have data, and we also have speed with regard to response to cases like that. So we should not wait for another pandemic to actually evolve before we think of how to respond to these things using technology to address those issues. So we should continue to improve on our ability to use technology and also go beyond restrictions of space to address complaints of violations, particularly SGBV. The Commission is also working with other stakeholders like the Nigerian Communications Commission to integrate response to SGBV into the National Emergency Communications Center. We had discussion with NCC, and plans are actually on the way to actually help mainstream SGBV response into national intervention or national emergency response whenever issues like that arise. Very soon we'll be hearing more about that.
All right. We'd like to thank you for joining us, Mr. Harry Obeid, the Director, Women, Children and Vulnerable Groups, Department, NHRC. Thank you for joining us on the program.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And while the US President Donald Trump has been receiving treatment at the hospital, administered a cocktail of medication following his admission for COVID-19 at the Walter Reed Military Medical Center, White House Press Secretary Kylie McEnany has also tested positive for the virus. She posted on Twitter saying after testing negative consistently, including every day since Thursday, she tested positive for COVID-19 this morning while experiencing no symptoms. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, in the UK, over 12,000 cases of the virus has been recorded. Well, let's tell you more that's happening, and this is our website, channelstv.com. It has more stories across the world. Plus, you see that Sierra Leone schools are also reopening 6 months after the shutdown. You can find more stories there at your fingertips. It's channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Good evening.